So, in terms of the med admission process, the general admission process will be essentially we start with an academic score and then we have a test which is focused on your potential to learn. Regardless of what test you do, it's more or less focused on your ability to kind of retain knowledge or build from logic, ability to learn after that. And then the last stage of that is just an interview. So, the academic score itself, it will either be your ATAR or your WAM. So your ATAR if you're going from high school into undergrad, and your WAM if you're doing another course, or you're coming from. So it will be this is for kind of domestic students, so students who are interstate or from the same state. For international students, a little bit different, but similarly, you will require some type of academic score, whether that be like an IB score or an international equivalent of the one. And that's plus or minus. Some schools will have formal applications or questions which are just specific to that school. And if you need to do that, essentially all that needs to be done is we need to make sure it's people apply for it and that you have to fill out. Normally it's questions like why do you want to do medicine? What's your perspective on blah blah blah, or it might ask you about a social issue which you want to write a kind of a response to. Other types of questions can also be like, what is an experience that in your lifetime you think you'll never forget, or what's an experience that you think was really important to learn from? And those types of questions, I think that the University of some of the New South Wales universities used to do a lot of those types of questions. Bond University used to do a lot of those types of questions. So it kind of just depends on which university you're looking at. But some will just use kind of the your core things that you're kind of doing throughout the year and just combine those. Some will require specific applications directly to the university. Okay, so in terms of the potential test, there's the UCAT or the GAMSAT. So the UCAT used to be something called the UMAT, which was decades ago, but essentially both of them are looking at the potential. The UCAT is even more potential based than the GAMSAT because the GAMSAT requires some scientific background knowledge, and kind of writing essays, doing that background knowledge part as well. So it requires some prior knowledge to sit that test. It's also quite a bit longer than the UCAT test, in terms of the number of questions and the time length as well. So just keep that in mind. And the last process for basically entry to any medical school is the interview component, which is focused on having it can either be an MMI, so multiple mini interviews, or it can be just like panel based, so you sit in front of a panel, or it can be one-on-one based as well. So couple different scenarios. In Monash, it is MMI, so multiple mini interviews. And essentially what that is like it's at 10 or 12 minutes per room, and you go in, they talk to you about a scenario, ask you a question, and you kind of just tell them your perspective on it, and you answer a couple of questions that they might pose to you. And they think about it and mark you based on that. A panel interview, a more common type of question is, why do you want to do medicine? It's kind of more general about getting to know you. They also might ask some scenario questions as well, like in this scenario, what would you do? But otherwise, they're normally longer overall, so they're normally like half an hour to an hour compared to the mini mental, which is not mini mental, mini multiple mini interviews. And because the multiple mini interviews, you normally have, I think either you have about eight, and when you go through the process, that kind of amounts to an hour and a half overall. So overall, the same amount of time that you're kind of spending with the two things, but the panel interview, you're kind of just there for the straight hour, just talking with the same people, compared to the mini multiple, which you're just talking one on one with a person. I've also heard of interviews where it's just an hour just talking with one person as well. So that's completely possible as well. But there's a lot of interview types, and there's a lot of interview training as well in terms of what things you want to say, how you want to portray yourself. But I guess just as a kind of preemptive tip, it's just to best portray yourself as yourself because they are really good at determining whether you mean things or not. So just talking a little bit about medicine at Monash, that's just how the selection occurs. It will different things will different apply to different schools. So for Monash, it was one third, one third, one third rating in terms of the each of the different components. I know some places which weight the interview as 50% of the overall score. So it just kind of depends on what school you're looking to go to. But the selection process in most places will go that you have the academic score and then you have the potential score, and then those two are combined together to select people for the interview. And then once you're successful into the interview, you can kind of progress and get into the course. So, tips for medical admission, you want to decide early whether you want to do postgrad or undergrad, and that way you can decide to do the UCAT or stress later. So, because the UCAT is also a big responsibility, especially during VC where you're doing a lot of study and you want to decide early, oh, am I going to go through that route or that route? Another thing is this doesn't matter if you're undergrad, postgrad, you have to decide whether you want to go to interstate or international because a lot of those ones might have different requirements, like the answering of questions that I talked about before. And essentially, you just want to be careful about not missing any deadlines for any of those, because often if you miss a deadline, you have to wait another year. And obviously, another year of not being in a course or another year of doing something else might not be something you're looking for. So just make sure to look into it early and decide what university am I willing to, where in interstate, where internationally I would be willing to go for university. So another thing is make sure to get a good study group to go through the GAMSAT and UCAT questions because sometimes they are a bit ambiguous of like what the correct answer is, and one person will say the correct answer and you can kind of pick their brain about why they chose that answer and the reasoning behind it. And your ATAR/WAM is just one segment of the selection criteria, but remember, even if it's only that one section of the selection criteria for medicine, it's really important for your everything else. So say you go through and you get a great WAM. Say let's consider two different scenarios. Say you go through, you try hard, you get a good WAM, you spend a little bit less time on your GAMSAT, so you do a little bit worse, but then you don't get it, let's say. So you still got a good WAM. So you can there's a lot of opportunities from there, which are postgrad courses, which kind of open up because you've gotten a good WAM. Compared to that, if you had the same scenario and you focused really, really hard on your GAMSAT and your WAM was not as great as you wanted it to be, in that scenario, if the same thing happened and you didn't get in, it would kind of leave you in a worse position in terms of trying to get into other courses as well. And during the interview, like I said, try to keep calm, be professional, be calm, but try to get through a bit of your personality as well because they will see that a lot.